The very ink with which history is written is liquid prejudice. Mark Twain said that. And yes, he's right. All history is bias. And the thing is, this is how I start my year in history class with new students. I just ask them, well, what is history anyway, right? This is what we're going to study. What is history? And no, it's not just all the things that happened in the past, or it's not even that, right? The past is the past. What history is actually the study of the past, an accounting of the past, a narrative. And whatever narrative you're reading, whatever accounts you're reading or looking into regarding the past, there's always someone behind that source, someone who created it. And I like to tell my kids to think of it this way. It's like us, the people of today, if we were to travel to the earth of the past, to the world of the past, right? And there's no way for us to see everything that's going on at one time. I mean, even today we can't do that, right? And to know for sure exactly what's happening. And the accounts, the narratives that we choose to study, the historians that we choose to trust, they're like our tour guides or our bus driver, our pilot through the past, right? We go the route that they choose to take us, right? And you could even think of it this way. It's like you're traveling, whatever vehicle you're traveling in has windows, right? And you can see to the outside through these windows. You can't see everything. Whatever you see is framed by the windows. It's never everything, right? And to get a better picture of wherever you're traveling, the past, you need to look through multiple windows. But even then, right, the multiple windows you're looking through, you're going a particular route or you're in a particular place at a particular time. It's not everything. Like, we have a finite amount of time and resources, and so we can only study a finite amount of perspectives. And so whatever we study, there's always going to be a natural bias. And most of it is unintentional, okay? But I think that we need to tell our kids, that our students, that this is what history is, and whatever we're studying, whatever the textbook chooses to give us, whatever stories they choose to tell, that's the stories they choose to tell, and that there are other stories that are untold. There are other perspectives that are not included in that textbook or that curriculum that you've chosen to study. And I think that's very, very important. I always start the year with that because I don't want them to just take and think that, oh, it's written in a textbook, it must be true, right? Or I see it on a History Channel film, that guy said it, it must be true. That's not how that works, right? And I think that's very important for parents, right? We have these fears of like, what are they teaching in history? Like, it's become so politicized, right? School districts are spending so much money revamping their history curriculum, and I think what it is, some people are coming into it thinking like, oh, this is the story that we're telling to our kids that has happened as fact, right? But I think that that is not the best way to teach history. That's not how I've taught history. I always just start the year telling the kids, well, whatever thing we see, we have to challenge it. We have to ask, what are we not seeing? What perspective is not present? What's the other side? That's why we love doing history debates. We're always doing history debates in my class and pulling in multiple perspectives. And I've noticed with that, the students have a more balanced approach towards history. It's not just like, this is what happened, this is the way it was, black and white kind of thing. And even to make sure to tell them, like, we're here in this history class, I'm your history teacher, I'm basically your filter. I filter what you see, I control what you see, what sources to give you, right? But am I going to be omniscient? Am I going to be perfectly all-knowing of everything? And am I going to completely be unbiased? And they know that that's not true, right? That I, as their teacher, as a person, as a human being, will have biases. And that's something I like to put out front and just tell them, like, I have my own limits, my own biases. Be aware of that. And I encourage you to seek other perspectives, and we can discuss it openly, right? Even if there is a disagreement, as long as it's logical and that it makes sense, there's evidence. So we really work a lot on logic too. It's not just like, oh, I feel this because this, right? Or this person in history felt this. Like, that's a fact, they felt that, right? And we're not going to argue with what they felt or saw, but does it make it true? Okay, so we have those kinds of discussions. But it's a tricky class. I think it's so important to make sure, like, you really hammer this idea into your students that it's not black and white. You know, what really got me into history, I'm going to go on a tangent here. What really got me into history, I was at UCLA and I was just taking it as an elective, actually, a couple of classes. And I was studying world history with a Russian history professor and a American history with just like an American history professor. And it was amazing because at the same time, my two different classes, my Russian history professor was saying, well, Truman dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan because he was really flexing his muscles at Stalin. It wasn't just purely trying to end World War II. He was trying to show Stalin, hey, I don't have just 1 nuclear bomb, I have 2 and I have more. So your intent to spread communism, you better be careful because I'm not going to allow for that. So that's basically kind of what my Russian history professor was saying. And then my American history professor was just so, in our class, was just so sure and so adamant that the United States had to drop not 1, but 2 nuclear bombs on Japan because there was no other way. And that more lives would have been lost if we hadn't, and that the war would have dragged on forever. So that just opened my eyes to so much, and it made me realize, like, wow, history is not black and white written in a textbook and about, you know, old dead people in dusty old textbooks. There's a lot of detective work, right? Like, they're looking at different sources and coming to conclusions, 2 different, very different conclusions. And I realized that's what history is. It's a lot about conclusions and speculations. It's not just, this is what happened and that's that. So I think in our classes, when we're teaching history, whether it's in the classroom or homeschool, that's what we're doing now, it's very important to, first one, this is what I've found has worked for us. One, really, again, hammer this idea down into your kids. Like, this is just one perspective, one set of stories, and historians do their best to be objective, right? At least the historians with integrity, and to be objective and not so biased, but they have limits. They have their own biases that they may not even be aware of. And because of our level, right, of our level of expertise, we have to be reliant on them for the facts, the information that they give us. And we have to be reliant on some of their conclusions. To approach this better, let's try to look for different sources and different opinions, different conclusions by different professional historians. Okay, so that's the first one. Number 2, I think that we just need to develop a greater skill for discerning between fact and opinion, right? Like, I think we all kind of stop at the elementary level lesson about fact and opinion, you know, like the North won the Civil War versus I like ice cream. Chocolate is the best flavor of ice cream, right? Like, oh, that's clearly an opinion. But then when you get to history, you get things like, for example, Lincoln forced the South to fire the first shot of the Civil War. He was a great, military tactician that way, or a political tactician that way. And I know the second part is clearly an opinion, but the first part, well, how do we know he forced it, right? I mean, there's these things that were happening at Fort Sumter and sending it. For the most part, we can probably trust the historian who said that. And if we look at the same evidence that they do, but I think it's good to also be aware, like, this is that historian's conclusion, right? Is there, unless maybe he did, a place where Lincoln ever actually said or wrote down, I will force South Carolina to fire the first shot of the Civil War so that I am not the one who starts it. And that's why one of our history debates is, was the Civil War a just war? And I know to some it may seem like there's a clear, obvious answer, but there's a lot around, well, how did the war begin and what was Lincoln's intention at the beginning, right? And he did talk about it. And then it's just weighing like historical conclusions and speculation. And that's why there can be debate about it, because things are not set in stone. And finally, number 3, I know history is a class with so much information. So as teachers, we tend to focus on that, right? And then I think that some of us think, it's all about memorizing information, and then critical thinking kind of gets pushed, like, yeah, it's important, we'll do it. But then most of what we do, what we test our kids on, our projects or whatever, our final assessments, is about memorizing facts. So then, yeah, of course they're going to think, history is black and white and this is exactly what happened, right? But I think we really have to prioritize developing critical thinking and historical thinking skills, like figuring out cause and effect, right? And providing evidence for claims and evaluating the evidence that people put forth for their claims, and looking for perspectives, evaluating perspectives, different perspectives, like Andrew Carnegie that says this is the way it happened, right? Or Theodore Roosevelt, Rockefeller, and the historian that's looking at it, this is how they see it. Well, what's another way to see it? Like, those are all really important skills to have, and that we don't impose our modern values, our modern morality and philosophies onto the people of the past. So contextualizing and really looking at them as a whole, like what environment did they grow up with, what philosophies and values did they have as a society, and then as an individual in that society, in that country, in that place, in that time, is very important. And I think that these skills, it's not just relevant to studying the past, it's relevant to living the future. We have so much, I think, when you look at the media, social media, there's so much divisiveness and anger, and just, we can't even get into genuine, productive conversations anymore, right? Like, it's okay to disagree, and to talk about it, to continue to talk about it, but we need to be able to do it in a peaceful way where we are talking about the evidence or the logic of our claims and our beliefs, and we need to engage in these conversations, because otherwise we isolate ourselves and group ourselves into silos and little tribes, and we don't know what the other people believe, or we do, but we don't know why they believe that, and we can't relate because we don't engage in conversation. And I think these historical thinking skills, these critical thinking skills, will help us do that today in the present. So I think it's a great class that, we can't emphasize enough, especially for the times that we have now. But it's very important to teach our children that this is what it is, and to really focus on those skills And the study of the past is a great vessel for developing the skills that we need for today. So I hope that has been helpful. I know this is not how everyone does things, but this is what I've found that has worked for me in our history classes for the past few years. And if you have other advice or things that you do, please leave them down in the comments below. And I hope you have a blessed day. Until next time.